Hello and welcome to SAP TechEd 2020. My name is Jens. I'm working as a product manager in the area of cloud and lifecycle management. Today's topic will be focused on zero downtime maintenance for upgrading SAP S/4HANA. Let's get started with a brief overview on all the downtime optimization techniques that we have, followed by some technical insights about the ZDO option. That's actually the reason why we are here, right? Next, we're going to go through some project planning aspects and also a customer story that I have prepared for this session. Last but not least, I'm going to wrap up the session with some key takeaways. SAP offers various downtime optimization approaches as part of Software Update Manager. On the left-hand side, you can see SAP Business Suite. Here, we do have an option that is called Database Migration Option. If you want to further optimize the downtimes, you can make use of the Downtime Optimized DMO. Of course, we highly recommend you, if you are not there, to go for an SAP S/4HANA system. If you are on SAP Business Suite, you can use, for instance, a downtime optimized conversion to reach SAP S/4HANA. There's also various other ways to optimize the downtimes dependent on whether you're starting with an NEDB or whether you're starting with SAP HANA already. So for instance, if you have reached HANA already, you can use the NZDM option. In both options, there's also another approach that is a service-based approach that is called NZDT. Near zero downtime technology can only be used along with a service booked via SAP. However, today's focus will be not on a system conversion, but we are focusing on updating and upgrading SAP S/4HANA. Here, we do have basically two options in order to optimize the downtimes. One is the NZDM, the near zero downtime maintenance, and second is the zero downtime option. Now, if you are on SAP S/4HANA, you have basically three ways to apply support packs, release upgrades, or feature packs. It starts with the standard approach, which already has downtime optimized techniques in place. So we continuously improve our procedure, the Software Update Manager, to optimize the downtime. For sure, the standard approach is generally available, similar to NZDM, which is also generally available. The difference here is that the NZDM focuses also on downtime optimization around conversion of tables, for instance, as well as the import of table content. The third option is the zero downtime option. Zero downtime option is an approach where we're going to run all the upgrade-related activities in the uptime. This approach is currently available for pilot customers. I'm going to talk about this, how pilot customers can get a zero downtime option later on as well. Keep in mind, the more you want to optimize the downtime, the more effort you have. So the effort is in terms of how many cycles do I have to run. It's also about what is about the functional validation that we have to perform. So usually you're going to validate the target release, right? But in zero downtime option, the effort for the functional validation increases because we also keep an eye on the source release. There is now three ways to optimize downtimes, or let's say to apply a support pack, a feature pack, or release upgrade. Which one should I choose now? If you have the standard, the NZDM, the ZDO, you can see that it depends actually on the business downtime that you want to achieve with, right? So if your business gets you like 48 hours or 72 hours, it's probably sufficient to go ahead with the NZDM option. Because you can already imagine if you use a zero downtime option, since I already told you this, the effort increases. That means the overall project runtime and also the effort that we have to put in order to validate the release increases. Now, that's a kind of a balance, right? So what can you get out of it? What do I have to put in for it? So that makes you, in the end, the decision on which approach you are going for. There's one thing that is so far not well known, actually. Not all the customers are aware that customer transports can be incorporated along with the software update manager. And that is independent of the approach. You can use this in the standard, in the NZDM, as well as in the ZDO approach. Now we're talking about S4HANA. When can you use zero downtime option? Basically, we're going to start it here with the release 1709, which means for the customers that run on 1511 or 1610, the downtime optimized way would be NZDM. Keep in mind, 1511 runs out of maintenance by end of the year. Let's continue with the zero downtime option. What is the motivation behind? We'd like to get rid of the technical downtime. That is our key focus. Be careful, don't mix it up with the business downtime, because the business downtime is always longer compared to the technical downtime. How do we achieve this? In the presentation, I probably will take up this example several times. The release 1, which is our start release, might be 1909, whereas the target release is then 2020. So we're going to run an upgrade for sure in all the uptime activities. And instead of entering the technical downtime, we move over all users on a kind of subsystem that is named as bridge. You can see this on the middle on the slide here. So the rollover from the original system to the bridge that runs then in parallel to all the upgrade activities has been done without any interruption. It's important that the bridge, which belongs to, for instance, 1909, does not see anything that the upgrade is doing, because the upgrade is preparing the 2020 release. Before going for the 2020 release, we have to activate this release, right? And the activation happens with a restart of the application servers. That usually takes around 5 to 15 minutes. You can find more information on all the prerequisites and restrictions in the main SAP node 2707731, which is also listed down below on the slide. This node will be shown up several times during my presentation. Now, we started already with 1709, right? In order to simplify the path, I'm going to start here with 1809 release. And keep in mind, the system conversion is not just an upgrade, right? It is a change of the product. We're going to change from Business Suite to SAP S4HANA. For this, we do not offer a zero downtime option. For all upgrade paths, including support packs and feature packs from 1809 to 1909, and then later also to 2020, we offer the zero downtime option. All the paths are available in the main SAP node that is listed also here again. There's an attachment where you can find the latest information on the availability of the paths. Now, with the zero downtime option, let's just compare how that looks like from a downtime perspective with the NZDM versus the standard versus the ZDO. You can see that also already with the NZDM approach, we significantly reduce the technical downtime. However, with NZDM, it is not possible to quantify the technical downtime saving. It's not like we're going to save always 50%. As a rule of thumb, it might be between 40, 50%, something like that. However, that really has to be performed in a test upgrade and benchmarked due to the standard upgrade. In the zero downtime option, we can quantify it. Yeah, so we come down to no technical downtime. It's just a pure restart of the application server. So it's a matter of a couple of minutes where the system has been shut down and brought up. Keep in mind, as I already emphasized, the business downtime is always longer in comparison to the technical downtime. The business downtime also includes the time when you ramp down the system and also later on when you ramp it up. You can see basically the technical downtime has been eliminated and replaced by the uptime on the bridge. So which means all former downtime activities are been done during the uptime on the bridge. Now, how does that work, right? We're going to take a look also into some technical details now in the next couple of minutes. The main downtime drivers that we have observed are like the PARCONF UPG, which is dealing with the table conversion and all the data definition language executions like new indexes, etc. Also, the main import, so importing table content that comes from SAP, probably new customizing, etc., is one of the downtime drivers. Last, I'd like to highlight here the XPRAS and after import methods. These are application-defined procedures that always run during an upgrade, and that causes also a lengthy downtime. Now, you can imagine by running all those activities during uptime, we have to prepare the system in advance, and we have to fulfill certain preliminary steps. That's summarized under the umbrella of the ZDO readiness process. Let's take a look how this process looks like. Now, the process consists out of 5 steps, basically. Let's start with step number 1, which deals with the native SAP HANA database objects that you have to take a look before you start with a zero downtime upgrade. Second, we also have to consider that the software that we're going to apply with our procedure meets certain guidelines and is compliant to those guidelines. On the one hand side, the software is shipped by SAP, which is like the support pack or a feature pack or a release upgrade. On the other hand, this software can also come from you because you may incorporate the customer transports. Also, the software update manager has to take care on how tables are handled during the upgrade. That's step number 3. Number 4 is the so-called impact analysis, because we'd like to see whether using zero downtime option might have a business impact while running on the bridge. After each upgrade, you have to consider that starting with target releases 1909 and higher, site and data migration classes have to be triggered and executed before starting the next upgrade. So now let's take a look into every single step. Again, we're going to start with step number 1. I mentioned we have to deal with the native HANA artifacts. That could be a calculation view or also an attribute view, for instance. One of the key principles of a zero downtime upgrade is that the source release and the target release are kind of encapsulated. So the bridge system must only see the content that belongs to the source release while the upgrade prepares the target release. This is actually not ensured by the so-called SysBig schema, which is the SAP HANA repository that was shipped initially with SAP HANA 1.0. So in order to be ready before starting a zero downtime upgrade, you have to consider that those views and that's like calculation views and attribute views have to be migrated into HDI containers, whereas HDI stands for SAP HANA Deployment Infrastructure. I highly recommend to take a look to the tutorial in SAP Help Subcom. There you can find a guided tutorial how you migrate from the old repository into the HDI containers. Step number 2, that's about the compliance. Yeah, the software that comes from SAP means we have to follow certain guidelines, and our developers internally, they run the guideline checks automatically because they are based on the ABAP test cockpit. Also, what the developers have to take care on is that those changes that are being shipped are fully transparent and enabled for zero downtime upgrades. What does that mean, right? So if For instance, a database field has been changed. It might be a key field, and that would be against our regulations and the rules. Then the developer would get an error message, and he can't release this particular change. Also, talking about application-defined procedures like IAMs and XPRA reports, these reports and function modules, they also change maybe content in the table, the tables that belong to your system. As you already have heard, the SAP upgrade has to make sure that the source release and the target release is encapsulated. If we change content in certain tables, this also needs to be somehow encapsulated. And that is usually ensured by cloning those tables. But how can the software update manager figure out which tables need to be cloned? I'm going to come back to this in a minute. But already here, I can tell you in the AIM and XPRA case, the developers of those reports and methods, they have to declare if my report runs, I'm going to access the following tables. Last but not least on this slide, what I'd like to highlight here is, again, the main SAP node. This does not only contain the prerequisites, but also the restrictions that we may have currently in certain releases. So take a look to the SAP node. There's section number 4, and some of those applications and the restrictions have been already resolved with 1909 and higher. So they were applicable, for instance, for the release 1809. Now, if you plan to incorporate customer transports, you also need to know which guidelines do we have to follow. And basically, that has been shipped last year with the ABAP Test Cockpit. In the ATC framework, we have this rule set established where your developer, for instance, can run those checks via SE80 or along with the transport release process. Also, your release management, if they are about to build the list of transports, and that's summarized under the so-called queue or buffer file, this one can be checked against our regulations using a web-based wizard. And then in the end, once you have created the buffer file, you can hand it over to your basis admin, and eventually the basis admin runs the software update manager, consuming the buffer file, which consists the transports. And in the end, the software update manager takes care on the import of those transports. If you want to get more information on the wizard that I already mentioned, take a look at the blog that has been published in SAP community. Step number 3 of our readiness process is one of the most crucial parts in the ZDO upgrade. If an upgrade runs, the upgrade probably brings some changes with. If the upgrade does not touch a table, we just keep the table as it is. That's basically 90% of your tables, right? But as soon as the upgrade is doing a structural change or importing content, or an AIM or XPRA is touching a certain table, we have to make sure that those changes are not visible for the bridge. Because please remember, the bridge is the business users that still work on the existing and the original release. So in our example, this is 1909, whereas the upgrade prepares the release 2020. It is ensured by our synchronous replication that the changes that are persisted by the bridge into the original table, that this change has also been forwarded to the table version 2, which will be the one that survives after the upgrade. Now, eventually there is a third column, and it could be that, for instance, a complex structural change like this key field that is getting changed leads to a clone read-only classification, which basically means the bridge can't persist any data during this bridge runtime into this particular table. Usually we assume that's just customizing tables. However, we need also to prove that there is no impact to the productive operations while running the bridge operations and while running the zero downtime upgrade. And that leads me now to step number 4, where we have a tool that has been developed some time ago. It is named impact analysis. we're going to start with a ZDO project in the sandbox system. And if we apply the same stack in the sandbox and also later in the production, the classification algorithm always calculates the same result. So now what we can do is, already in the sandbox, we can basically export the statistical usage from production and merge both the information. And in the end, we can get a simplified output where we get the information. For instance, table B gets changed more than 600 times a day, but is getting set to read-only, and that has been highlighted in the report. Now, let's take a look to the demo and see how the impact analysis works in the dialog mode. I'm now logged on via SAP GUI to my sandbox system. I've executed the dialog version of the impact analysis via transaction SE38. On the selection screen, we're going to keep the defaults and just use the execute button in order to proceed. In the result of the impact analysis, we have header information that shows us where we have exported the statistics that has been used. In this case, I have exported the statistics from my productive SAP S/4HANA system called S4H. Also, what we can see here, if we go to the lower part of the output, we have an important key figure that indicates the additional database space that we need in order to clone the tables that are classified as cloned. In this case, you can see that we need additionally 409 gigabytes in our SAP HANA database. The results that you can see in the middle of the impact analysis screen is divided into different severities. The green results are shown green because they are considered as uncritical. You can see the tables, for instance, PAT star belong to a transaction called SPAM that is used for importing support packages, which you obviously don't use during an upgrade. So hence we have decided we can consider these entries as uncritical. Picking out another example, for instance, the table CREP HTTP. This table has some 60 changes a day in average in our productive system. However, it's been set to read only during the bridge runtime. So for the 2 or 3 days that you probably stay on the bridge. Here you have to work with your business teams in order to figure out which is the process that is blocked and is the process even used during the bridge runtime. Last, let's pick out the example for the clone size. Also here, we're going to raise an alarm if we know that there is a table that is pretty large, but we have to clone it. It's just as a heads up for you. So for instance, the SMIME cont1 needs 373 gigabytes out of the 409 that we need in total. So with this, I'm already at the end of the demo. Let's go back to the presentation and let's see how the other steps of the ZDO readiness process work. Okay, after having seen how the impact analysis works in the dialog mode, let's take a look into how can I get most of the output of the impact analysis. Actually, if we run the impact analysis only one time with one selected export of statistics, we may see results that come up only for this particular week. So the recommendation is take a look to your productive system and do not only export, for instance, calendar week 20, but also the 21, 22, and 23, for instance. Keep in mind, do this 4 times, but do not aggregate those statistics because that would then lead again to an aggregated result. So the thing what we're going to achieve here is we're going to run the impact analysis then again in the dialog mode 4 times. One time for calendar week 20, the second time for 21, and so on and so forth. In the end, we will have 4 different outputs. Maybe they are all equal, but from what we have seen with other customers, there's some small differences in between. And that helps us also to understand how those impact analysis results have to be handled. There might be a table set to read only, but it's only a process that is triggered at the beginning of the month. But if you trigger the upgrade maybe in the 2nd or 3rd week of a month, then it doesn't matter whether this particular table is read only or not. So in the end, we'd have to also make sure that we get rid of so-called false positive results in order to shorten the list. So that really helps you to better foresee which table has to be checked more in detail with the business team. Coming to the last step of the readiness process. And that's basically coming after the upgrade. So after performing an upgrade, and that started with the SAP S/4HANA release 1909, there's silent data migration classes that have to be triggered. Actually, they should be triggered automatically, but we have seen that for some customers, when they have not created the user automatically as part of the SUM procedure, that those haven't been triggered, right? So please take a look to the blogs that are listed in here in the SAP community, where a colleague from the COE team in North America has well described how the silent data migration works. Basically, the idea of this is it's a kind of an XPRA program. So we'd like to convert certain and migrate certain records in particular tables. If we would do this with an XPRA program, that would not be ZDO compliant. So the SDM, the silent data migration, is a way and a vehicle in order to convert the data post the upgrade. That decouples then the functional change from the data model change, because the data model has been changed already in the SUM tool. However, the functional change has been done in the uptime when the silent data migration class runs. That also is one of the things why SAP does currently not offer the jump upgrades for zero downtime option. So if you perform an upgrade from SAP S/4HANA 1809 and you want to target directly 2020, that could be done with the NZDM approach. If you want to use zero downtime option, there is currently no option to do this path like 1809 to 2020. Keep this in mind. Now, we have seen how the readiness process worked, and let's take some key takeaways here and the key facts around the software update manager and the ZDO option. As you can see, and as you have seen already, the ZDO comes along with the standard tool, which is our software update manager. The upgrade runs while the business users is still active on the system. The business users are transferred to the subsystem that is named Bridge, and this transition happens without any interruption. The good thing is we can quantify, actually, compared to other approaches where it was not that easy, we can quantify the downtime in terms of the business downtime. It's actually consisting of the ramp down activities, the restart of the app servers, and the ramp up activities. That's the business downtime that can be achieved. Last but not least, you have seen the software update manager takes care on which tables have to be cloned because they are changed by the upgrade. And that keeps our database footprint as small as possible. So we don't clone the entire database, but we clone only selective tables. So with this, I'd like to come to some project planning specifics. You have seen that the sandbox approach is very important for us in order to run the first ZDO iteration. That helps us to better see how ZDO works and whether technically the ZDO procedure works without any problem. Also, you're going to start creating your cookbook. We have seen that the customers that want to use zero downtime option, they're going to use the approach for all the systems across their landscape. So the development, the QA system, and eventually shortly before production, you take a new copy of it, you rehearse your upgrade in order to finalize the cookbook and also to finalize your tests in terms of the bridge validation. That is very important. Validating the bridge helps you to foresee whether there's any blocked business process during the upgrade. For sure, we have the impact analysis that is continuously also been used along with the project. However, we also highly encourage you to validate the business processes that are relevant and needed during the bridge runtime in one of the non-productive environments, like maybe in QA or in the rehearsal system. Now, how can you get the zero downtime option? First, you're going to check the main SAP node. I think now, in the meantime, you will remember the node number already. Take a look again to the node, and there you can find in the last section a registration process in order to get started with the zero downtime option. This registration ticket is handled by the product team within SAP, and then we're going to plan the next steps. So when do you want to do the upgrade? How can SAP be engaged? Because currently the procedure is available to pilot customers, which makes it mandatory to engage SAP, for instance, consulting or the center of expertise. Then for sure, the last step that we see here is you would like to execute the zero downtime option. The POC is essential, and one of the is actually the decision maker whether you continue with the project. So having a successful POC will be then used as part of the wrap-up for a decision whether you want to go forward or whether there is any blocking issue that has been observed and identified during the proof of concept. We have done such proof of concepts in the past with customers, and one customer is Varian Medicals in the US. So we have done a POC some time ago where the customer also used the functionality of testing the bridge runtime from a business standpoint. That was very valuable for them. Now they are well prepared in order to plan the next steps, right? So now I'm looking forward to see the next project upcoming with Nirmal and the team. Now, that was already pretty much what I wanted to show from the customer projects and the project planning aspects. We can now jump directly into the wrap-up of our session. Let's start with the availability. As you have learned, ZDO is an option that comes along with the software update manager with the standard tool. The registration process in order to get the zero downtime option is well described in the SAP note 2707731. So if you'd like to leverage zero downtime option, don't hesitate to create the ticket as described there, or you may also drop me an email later on. I will also share my contact details with you. What are the advantages, right? So I've talked about the advantages in terms of not only updating and upgrading the SAP part. If you have large customer releases, you may also incorporate those releases along with the update. Also, what we have seen is if a customer has maybe hundreds or thousands of transports 2 times a year, for instance, you can also make use of customer transports only along with the procedure zero downtime option. So there's various ways to combine the tooling with various approaches. You can see, or you have seen in the presentation, that by using zero downtime option, we can significantly reduce our downtime down to a single restart of the application servers. Based on the experiences that we made with customers, we have seen that this probably takes approximately 5 to 10 minutes. Because the restart has been done in parallel, and that significantly also reduces the timing of this restart. So with this, I'd like to close the session, and let's continue with the learning. If you're interested in further sessions around SAP S/4HANA, then I'd like to highlight here some sessions from my colleague Roland. He's talking about the paths, as well as my colleague Boris Rubart. He's talking about the system conversion to SAP S/4HANA. Also, from SAP TechEd, there is a learning portal where you can continue your learning journey after SAP TechEd. Because after the SAP TechEd is completed online, you still can continue your learning, even though the broadcast is switched off, but you can continue your learning afterwards. So now, as I already promised, here's my contact details. My email address is the first name dot the last name @sap.com. Feel also free to get connected via LinkedIn. You can just search for my first and last name in LinkedIn. With this, I'd like to say thank you for your attention, and I wish you a successful rest of the TechEd and looking forward to hear from you via email or maybe via the registration ticket. Thank you.